we're going to look at a table that you'll see in your book as well as in the notes, and it looks something like this. What this is about is, well, to preface it, I need to tell you something, and that is that as data goes down the OSI model, down from layer to layer, there's some information added to that data. Now, the transport layer is where we actually segment the data. So it's at the transport layer that we begin to chop up the information into smaller bits. And then we add something called the L4 or layer 4 header. The layer 4 header has a couple of things in it that are important. A sequence number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on, so the receiving device knows how to put this thing back together, put all these data chunks back together when it receives them. It also has a port number, which is, you can think of a port number as the address of an application. We'll explain that a lot more later on, so don't worry about what I mean by that, but we will see that later. And then as it's passed down to the network layer, we have a layer 3 header that we add on to it, and this has a couple of important, or actually one big important thing, and that is the IP address. The IP address is used for distance addressing. In other words, addressing outside of the network. As that is now passed down to the next layer, we have the data link layer, and that's where local addressing takes place. Layer 2 header is stuck in front of the layer 3 header, and by the way, there is a layer 2 footer that we'll mention here briefly. So this has what we call the local address. In most cases it's the MAC address. This is how we get information from one computer to another within our network. Now, you know it has to bounce around in your own network before it can go outside the network. So as it goes, say, from a computer to a router, it would travel on the data link or MAC address there, and then as it leaves the router, it now switches over to layer 3 and uses the IP address. At the footer here of L2 is something called an error check. It's a CRC, or there are actually some other names for it which we'll get into later on, but this is a way of checking to see whether all this other stuff is valid or not, and if it's not, it will drop this entire, I'm going to call it a packet for now, although we'll see some other names for these as we add on to these various pieces of data. And as I forgot to mention, by the way, this process is called encapsulation. It's much like those nested dolls or maybe nested storage cans or something, where you just keep stacking something inside the next one, which you stack inside the next one, and so forth. Finally, at the physical layer, there's really no header added to the physical layer, or footer for that matter, but this is where the actual signaling takes place. So that's the idea of this particular chart.